Okay, I guess we'll kick things off here. So I say greetings and thank everyone for joining us on the celebration of the 76th anniversary of the United Nations. I'm Robert Lonley Sapansky, and I'm the president of the Center County chapter of the United Nations Association. The UNA USA is a group of Americans dedicated to supporting the United Nations with over 20,000 members, 60% of whom are under the age of 26, and more than 200 chapters across the country. UNA USA members are united in their commitment to a global engagement and the belief that each of us can play a part in advancing the UN's mission in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So that's exactly why we're here today, and I want to thank you all for joining us. We are recording this. We'll also make it available on our Facebook page and YouTube and our webpage for future viewing, because I know there's a number of people who just really couldn't tune in today. So the United Nations theme for this year is creating a blueprint for a better future, and we'll try our best to do that today. And we'll let you know that in addition to the UNA USA, there's over 100 different countries involved in the World Federation of UNAs, including Russia. The United Nations was founded in 1945 on this day, following the horrific events of World War II. And the UNA came into existence at the same time. The early champion of the UNA was Eleanor Roosevelt. She just strolled into the offices one day and said, "Give me something to do." And in a matter of time, she'd taken over as director and led the association through its many early years. So pre-pandemic, our chapter led a number of programs annually, highlighted by our UN Day dinner, which was attended by about 150 people. We had residents from over 40 different countries. Many would come dressed in the traditional garb from their homelands. But of course, because of COVID, we felt it wise to do our program virtually again this year. And we're excited by our featured speaker, Dr. David Hughes, and the work he's doing in many areas, including food security. And we'll get more about Dr. Hughes shortly. So our agenda, as you see there, is me chatting for a while, and following me, we'll hear from Ms. Ella Underwood, who's a high school senior in Bellefonte, president of the Model United Nations Club there. COVID has limited the Model United Nations clubs from traveling to competitions, so we invited her to update us on what's going on with their club. Next, I'll introduce Dr. Hughes, present his talk entitled "Takes a Village, the PlantVillage Model for Combating Food Insecurity in Africa." And we've set some time aside for questions and answers. We invite you to participate by raise your hand using the little icon and then unmute you so that you can ask the question. Next, we will introduce the Make a Difference project, which is Dr. Hughes's PlantVillage. And following that, as we always include some international music in our programs, we'll feature some Celtic folk songs by a local group of 4 women called Callanish. And finally, I'll provide closing comments and let you know how you can get involved with our association and how to join and get more information. So a couple words about the chapter. In addition to these featured programs, featuring wide variety of speakers on important and topical issues. Earlier this year, we had one on equity in education by Dr. Heather Bennett. We have presented a number of films, participated in Children's Day activities, established a fund to help support the local high school Model United Nations clubs, donated in funds in times of global crisis, most recently to the devastation in Haiti, collaborate with our council of organizations. They are groups of civic-minded citizens to support our efforts. We've raised thousands of dollars in our Make a Difference projects over the years, such things as solar cookers, water purification systems, shelter box tents and equipment, planted trees with Clearwater Conservancy, hundreds of life-saving vaccines for children. We supported orphanages in South Sudan and India, and many more. So I hope people will be just as generous this year in support of PlantVillage. So people ask, why is the United Nations still important? So just a couple facts. The UN provides food to over 80 million people in 80 countries. The United Nations vaccinates 45% of the world's children. I find that an amazing figure. Malaria, pneumonia, and diarrhea kill millions of children annually, and all are prevented by vaccines. The United Nations assists over 82 million refugees and people fleeing war, famine, and persecution. Their peacekeeping missions with 95,000 peacekeepers, 13 operations in 3 continents, 120 countries, contributing troops, police, and civilians to the effort. There are over 100,000 of these blue helmet field personnel. They operate on a budget of $7.3 billion. That's less than 0.5% of global expenses on military. And through it all, the United States funding the UN is just 0.2% of our total federal budget. There are currently discussions in Washington to raise our funding to the levels we agreed to, but did not fund appropriately over the last 4 years. So enough of my talking. I'm now pleased to present the president of the Model United Nations Club at the Bellefonte High School, Ms. Ella Underwood.
Hello, my name is Ella Underwood, and I'm the current Model UN president at Bellefonte Area High School. So in our club, we go to competitions, and they can be near or far, depending on what our school allows us to do. So when we go to competitions, we compete with others from other schools and also debate to solve current or past societal issues, sort of in a mock way. So we're not actually solving them, but we come up with possible scenarios. For example, a student could be a delegate from the country Russia and be in a human rights committee and have to argue Russia's perspective on human rights. So our club is dependent on fundraising and donations such as the Center County UNA has given so generously to us in the past. And during COVID, we are still trying to go to competitions. We are running into a few setbacks, but that's not stopping us from going, and we are going to all virtual competitions that we also find. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ella, and I'd like to thank Mr. Ed Fitzgerald, the advisor to the club, former president of our chapter. The students have done exceptionally well in their competitions, some internationally, and we're happy to support their efforts. I want to also mention that Ms. Maiken Porman, who's the ag teacher in Bellefonte, just finished a unit on food security with her students, and she had them submit something to it, Project Times Hunger, and one of the students' submittals was accepted by them, so I hope we can hear more about that down the line, but thank you, Ms. Porman. So now it's time for Dr. Hughes. I first became aware of him at a PSU TED Talk a few years back. I've gone to these for years, but David, your talk still sticks in my mind like no other. He next came to speak to my former department of food science, urging collaboration amongst departments in creating the means to get information developed in their agricultural research into the hands of people globally who desperately needed it, could not afford it. PlantVillage is a result of such work. The UN has set 17 sustainable development goals, and David's work touches on many of these, including zero hunger, climate action, life on the land, and gender equality. Dr. David Hughes is a Dorothy Four Huck and J. Lloyd Huck Chair in Global Food Security at the Pennsylvania State University and the founder of PlantVillage. He was a fellow at the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, UNFAO, from 2018 to 2020, where he solidified the relationship between Penn State and UNFAO using PlantVillage, a global platform that helps millions of farmers cope with pests and climate change. PlantVillage helps the UN to monitor transboundary pests across 80 countries, 30 languages. Dr. Hughes' previous work was a rainforest ecologist studying ants. Yes, he is the zombie ant guy. However, now his passion and focus is on global food security. He's a native of Ireland, that soon be pretty obvious, and he was educated at Glasgow and Oxford universities and held fellowships at Copenhagen and Harvard before coming to Penn State. Proud to introduce Dr. David Hughes. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Robert. Thank you very much for the invitation today. And it's really a great pleasure to be here, and very much want to applaud the sentiments expressed by Robert, and then the enthusiasm for individuals to try to come together and do something. And I'm always struck by this quotation by a famous anthropologist who said that never underestimate the ability of a small group of people to change the world. It's the only thing that ever has. So I think that civic-minded expression by Robert is really heartfelt and important. So let me just begin by sharing my screen, and then I'll take you through the work that we've been doing at PlantVillage to provide a context, and then hopefully we can have some questions afterwards and an enjoyable discussion for the afternoon. Okay, so I assume you can see my presentation, so I'll just kick off. A lot of the motivation for PlantVillage comes from this photograph, and this photograph really, to my mind, expresses the gross inequality that we see in the world today. 821 million people are food insecure. 3 billion people cannot afford a nutritious diet. And yet we are in 2021, a time in which we're connecting on Zoom, connecting through phones, the ability to call up a taxi easily on your phone, or through Uber, or to get a meal, get an apartment easily in a new city, so on and so forth. All of these things are driven by connected devices through phones, through satellites, through a global infrastructure that is the internet, and yet it is not equally available to all. And so these women on the right-hand side in Africa are very, very much representative of the problem. We have tools which are shovels, which really haven't moved on, and you have individuals picking up infected food from the ground. In this case, it's tubers of cassava. In Ireland, it was tubers of potatoes. And the technology hasn't moved in this 170 odd years. And in fact, the technology hasn't moved on even at a much broader scale. So this is a former UN ambassador, Kip Tom, to the Rome-based agency, and who was a great fan and advocate for PlantVillage. And we worked very closely together when I was in Rome and then subsequently. And this is a museum exhibit he has seen in Zimbabwe, showing the use of this simple hoe from 800 BC. And this is a picture of him in Zimbabwe in 2020, and women using exactly the same technology. And so when you have the world moving at this glacial speed, you have to recognize the gross inequality. And then the challenge is, how can these individuals prosper under normal conditions, and how can they prosper under the conditions of global climate change? And so PlantVillage exists to provide a mechanism whereby smallholder farmers across the continent of Africa can cope with pests and climate change. And so here's an example of how that works. So we have Rosalind in the foreground, and Rosalind is a lead farmer as part of PlantVillage, and she's talking to Emiliana in the background, and Emiliana is one of the following farmers. And so what we do is we provide Rosalind, who is a very typical farmer in Western Kenya, with a smartphone. So she, of course, doesn't have a smartphone. Oftentimes the farmers don't have electricity, but they do have lots of problems in their field. And in one case, the problems are a viral disease called cassava mosaic disease. And this virus is really damaging to the crop and reduces the potential yield by between 70 and 90%. And there's another problem she has, which is fall armyworm, which is an insect from the Americas, which has been introduced. Now, the way in which farmers in the United States or Ireland or European Union, India, China, etc., get knowledge, it's through the access to human experts who come from universities like Penn State or national research organizations in the European Union. Those individuals are not available in the fields in Africa. The ratio between experts and farmers is between 1 to 2,000 or 3,000 in Kenya, and in places like the Congo, it's 1 to 12,000, or Chad. So farmers never get to see a human expert. And what's happening here is that there's an artificially intelligent system in the phone that we have provided Rosalind. And that AI assistant is working offline, so it does not need an internet connection. And the AI assistant is twice as good as humans. And so her phone is telling her what the problem is on her cassava plant. And that means that she's getting educated. And more importantly, Rosalind is educating the following farmers like Emiliana. And so because it's just a simple piece of software, it's able to be spread across lots of phones across the continent. So the idea is that we can have artificial intelligence do something that humans are unable to do across all these fields because we just lack that human expertise. So PlantVillage is developing this suite of tools. And beyond that, what we're doing is developing not just the AI assistant in the phone, but the cloud-based system. We also use our cloud-based system for collaborative work across scientists in what's called the CGIAR, which is a consultative group for international agricultural research. And we also deliver content on TV and SMS, which I'll come on to later on. We reach about 9 million people a week on our system and about 500,000 on SMS. We do experimental plots and we're a knowledge platform. But relevant to today, we're a UN partner. And the fundamental idea is that look at the great success that we've seen at the land grant universities since 1862 when the land grants were set up, the important mark that is made on American life. And how can we take that great success story and distribute it through a phone across the global community? And so PlantVillage has joined with UNFAO since about 2018. We have a memorandum of understanding between Penn State and UNFAO. We also work closely with the World Food Programme. And what we do is take our advanced artificial intelligence technology, our cloud systems, and we provide that to the United Nations as a global public good. And the app that's being used most widely is this fall armyworm tool, which is being used from West Africa to Australia in over 30 languages. We've also built one for the Middle East on a red palm weevil. We built this one called eLocust 3M, which we'll come on to later on. And then we built some on food and other approaches. In 2019, we moved a little bit from, or refocused our efforts from pests and diseases to climate change. And this is because of what happened in April 2019 and also March and April, when we had these two huge cyclones come in to the coast of Mozambique. And they came into Mozambique and they pulled all the moisture out of the air. And they were both the largest ever cyclones seen. And one outcome of global change is hotter moisture in the air, which causes more cyclones. And this is what we see off the coast of Florida with hurricanes, or off the coast of Africa, which is cyclones, which are both the same thing, but it's just a different naming system. And so what happened there is the cyclones pulled all the moisture out of the atmosphere. And so what should have happened here in March 2019, we should have seen the increase in the growth. So this is a biomass being measured by satellites in the field where Rosalind is, and we should have seen an increase. And we did not, because all the moisture was pulled out of the atmosphere by cyclones hundreds of kilometers further south. And this led to many farmers unable to plant, or planting multiple times and having failures multiple times. And that really gave us an indication that we needed to be a climate change focused organization in order to be able to rise to this important challenge. And I think this rising to the challenge or rising to the occasion is very much exemplified by Lincoln's second inaugural address. Lincoln, of course, is important in this regard because it was under his watch that we saw the emergence of the land grant systems in 1862, as well as USDA. And what I like about this quote is it really kind of sets the scene for where we are. So the dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion. And then the quote continues, as our case is new, we must think anew, we must act anew, we must disenthrall ourselves. And this really, I think, perfectly drives home the current situation we're in, because climate change is the most important threat we face as a global community, not just, of course, in Africa. And this was really driven home to us in the summer of 2021. So this is British Columbia, where we had a large heat wave. So the temperature was 115, 118, 121 degrees Fahrenheit. On successive days, the records were broken in British Columbia in terms of heat. And on the fourth day, the town of Lytton, British Columbia, burnt down because of a spark set fire to the whole town. So this is something that has happened in Canada, and it was really dramatic. And throughout the whole summer, we've seen many other examples of the dramatic effects of climate change right in front of us. And climate change is, as the new USAID Administrator Samantha Power talks about, one of these four interconnected and gargantuan challenges, but really the most important that we have to deal with. So what happens when we have a heat dome like the one we saw over the Pacific Northwest? What happens when we have that over an area of Africa? And in fact, it's not too difficult to imagine, because we've had an increase in drought conditions for 4 successive years now in Madagascar. And this is what we see. We see a land which is just turning to dust. And for those of you who like your history of the United States, this is fast becoming the situation we saw in the 1930s in the US Dust Bowl, because the land is drying out, and then when it dries out, it blows away. So if we cannot cope with British Columbia in 2021 with climate change, what can we do for these people who are so resource poor and lack knowledge? So this is the fundamental challenge that I think we have to address. And I also would say that the Madagascar famine is so important because it's the first, according to the World Food Programme and the chief, David Beasley, it's the first example of a climate change induced famine. So I think that's really important, because lots of times famines come about because of an intersection between conflict and weather, or conflict and diseases of the crops. But in this case, it's just purely because of climate change. Every year for the last 4 years, it's become drier and drier, and the people are unable to adapt to that, and the crops die and the land blows away. So we had received money from Eric Schmidt's foundation, Schmidt Futures, in December 2019. And I mentioned this because we're on a bit of a fundraising drive, but having flexible money through gifts allows us to adapt. And as I mentioned, in April 2019, we really wanted to focus on climate change. And so in December 2019, we got this money, and then a huge example of a climate change threat emerged right in front of us, and we had to adapt quickly, which is what gift funding often allows us to do. So this is the locust crisis of 2020, 2021. So locusts are a symptom of climate change. Those cyclones that I talked about bringing moisture into Mozambique, what happened in mid-2018, they brought moisture into what's called a hidden quarter in Saudi Arabia and Qatar, so in the Middle East. And it led to a huge increase in grasshoppers, and the solitary phase of the grasshoppers then become the gregarious phase, which is what we call locusts. And those locust swarms kept on building up and building up. And at every point, they got more water from more storms coming in, and more water means more grass and more vegetation, and the numbers increased. And so a swarm like this, or a larger swarm, may be the same size as the city of New York. And a swarm like that, the same size as the city of New York, can eat as much food as everybody in New York State and the state of California in a single day. And this is just a gargantuan threat that is formidable. For those of you who, again, like your history or reading to your children, you may have read Little House on the Prairie, and there was an example in 1875 when there was a large swarm, and that swarm was just simply enormous. It was almost as large as the state of California, and that swarm moved across the Midwest, and that's the Rocky Mountain Desert locust, and it was devastating to the early farms of the United States, and eventually that locust was driven to extinction from the work of the USDA. And so locusts are tracked by UN and FAO, and this is Keith, our colleague and friend, and these are some records from 1985 to 2019 by dedicated field officers. Kenya had not had locusts for about 75 years, and then they moved in from Ethiopia on December 28, 2019. And remember, we had just received flexible funding through Schmidt Futures. And a country which had not experienced locusts for 75 years was ill prepared, and there was a lot of panic in the media about how they would deal with this. And this was compounded because on March 11, 2020, the COVID pandemic was declared by the World Health Organization, and that shut down travel. So we had a crisis within a crisis. And so because we are a UN partner, FAO asked us to build a surveillance tool for non-experts. So how do we get people in the country to help us chase these locusts so we can better respond to them? And so the challenge we had was, how do we turn an expert like Keith with his resources, and how do we, a person like Paul here, one of our PlantVillage team, how do we turn those people to be equal so that we can collect good data by young people across Kenya? And this is through the excellent work by Frank Doyle on our team. And so the first thing we wanted to do is we're operating these incredibly remote areas of northern Kenya where there's no cell towers. So we had to develop an app which was able to directly connect to satellite systems. And this is what's on top of Keith's car here. And so we're able to detect this through the phone and then move around the landscape and get an accurate recording. Because if we want to report the locusts, we need to know exactly where they are. The other issue is that this is Tyson also on our team. Keith is an expert on locusts and has trained for over 30 years on the system, and Tyson is just being employed by PlantVillage. So for sure we can provide photographs to him, but that would increase his ability or his brain to recognize them. But we also helped him through artificial intelligence, which is sort of the core functionality of PlantVillage. This is really work led excellently by Peter McCloskey, our lead AI engineer of PlantVillage. So what would happen is that Tyson would go into a location, record the presence of the locust because he's got a satellite connection, and then he would take an image of that, and that would be pulled up to the cloud where the AI system can accurately diagnose. And it's really important to know the type of locust you're dealing with, because that determines the intervention that would happen. So our team of locust trackers was based upon a model that PlantVillage had already pioneered in Kenya, and this model is of the Dream Team, which are young people who graduated from universities, who are excellent, highly motivated, and live in the communities they serve. And this has built a very large trust relationship with farmers. And so 2020 was a time when we had a massive problem of COVID, and then we had locusts, which were right across East Africa. And despite that, and it has not been in the news much because we all focus on COVID, of course, but it was devastating, and the threat to food security was immense. But through the PlantVillage model, in collaboration with lots of other partners across the region, really driven by the United Nations, it was a tremendous success. We PlantVillage and the UN and lots of partners, we saved food in 2020 for 40 million people. And that food was valued at $1.7 billion. And we played an important part through our flexible funding from Schmidt Futures. And then we were able to work with FAO, county governments, TV campaign to reach 16 million people and coordinated spraying. And you remember I mentioned Kip Tom. So he was writing up about this, and he talked about how PlantVillage, from one of our land grants, Penn State, has shown the important role of artificial intelligence, cloud computing, analytics, and satellite intelligence in cost effectively fighting the desert locust and other threats African farmers face. Data is critical for both the current threat, but future ones when they occur. You must measure and monitor digitally if you want to control. And I think that's an important take home for today. The idea that we can learn from these lessons of locusts to tackle a series of other problems as they emerge. And so, like many things in 2020, either they exploded, like your ability to get groceries delivered to your home, or working remotely through Zoom, or Netflix consumption. Lots of things exploded because of what happened during 2020. And that's no different to PlantVillage. We've really seen a massive explosion in our use, 1,400% increase in 2020. And so what we think has come out of this, and this is Rosalind again, is we can see how farmers can have this supercomputer in every hand across the continent. And this is helped by the Dream Team members, but also helped by this connection to satellite data. And I can show some of this. So this is our agricultural algorithmic advice system. So as people are using this app offline, as they're diagnosing the problems in the field, this is pulled into our cloud system where we can look at these records, but also we can integrate those records with a suite of satellite systems. So we have crop water balance models from one system of satellites called CHIRPS. We have another here directly measuring the growth of the plant and how well it's doing across time. And this is through the measurement of leaf area index with satellites from NASA. And this is also a NASA satellite system. So this is all allowing for massive inputs. And we take all of these people who have our phones across the country and the ground-based team with the Dream Team, and we integrate that with efforts in California and the Climate Hazard Group, which are world leaders in understanding East African weather. And then we deliver this now every week to 9 million farmers.
Welcome to the Shamba Shepherd Farming News for Kenya. In the coming week, we expect a little bit more rain.
So now 9 million farmers are getting advice that is relevant to climate change adaptation. And we also send this out to 500 SMS systems. We're starting to work with an Israeli company, and Israel is a country which is incredibly dry, and they've been really at the forefront of water preservation. So we're starting to put in these irrigation systems, which is using their advanced technology, really always, as always, in PlantVillage, trying to push the envelope of what sort of technology we can adopt and then bring to scale for helping smallholder farmers. But while the technology is important, we believe that the most important thing are the humans behind that. Because what we try to do is bring technology to smallholder farmers. We engage predominantly women farmers. 83% of PlantVillage farmers are women. 100% are less than $2.50 a day. And so it's extremely poor. So they're not going to obviously download your app because they have no smartphone and they typically don't have electricity. So we provide the smartphone, we provide the data, and we provide the training from the Dream Team members like Mercy or Winnie. These are extremely knowledgeable, high trust relationship individuals who work with these communities, and oftentimes work very effectively because they overlap in age with the farmers they serve, or sorry, overlap in age with the children of the farmers they serve. And that's one of the reasons why farmers trust them so much. And in fact, we've recently just hired our first Dream Team member, who is the daughter, her name is Faith. She is the daughter of one of our lead farmers, whose name is Consolata. And so the fundamental importance of this Dream Team is the development of trust, and that's the fundamental aspect of PlantVillage. Our farmers trust us, and they work with us in order to find solutions. We've expanded our Dream Team. So this desert locust crisis was across northern Kenya, and then the locust left because it was a successful control operation. But the problems of the pastoralist remained and became worse because of the intersection of drought and COVID. So COVID shut down the markets and prevented access, and the pastoralists could not sell their animals. And then COVID shut the schools, so a lot more kids had to stay out of school. And that led to a spike in child marriage. So this is reported in the New York Times last year, where a large number of young girls are being married off at the ages of 10, 11, because of the families simply can't afford to keep them around. And the situation has just gotten progressively worse because of drought. And so to our mind, northern Kenya is where Madagascar was 2 years ago. And if things don't change, it's going to continue in that direction where people will starve and die. And the last major drought in 2011, 260,000 people died in Somalia. And so what we're trying to do is build up the resilience in the system, working again, because we're highly trusted with local groups, to increase the health of the animals, but also increase access to water. And these are incredibly poor places where in this county, Samburu, 88% of the people are on less than $1.70 a day. So tremendously poor. We've expanded to Burkina Faso, one of the poorest countries in the world, number 183 on a list of 189 countries, and also a French-speaking country. So we wanted to begin our operations in West Africa. We've also expanded to Tanzania. Soon we've expanded to Uganda, and soon we'll expand to Malawi and other countries. And this is now just a tweet from a couple of days ago showing how we've now got 81 of these phenomenal young people. And we want to see 110 and 8,100. We believe that, of course, like many people, that the future in Africa is youth. And it's a critically important thing that we should push, because Africa, to our mind, has two problems. One is food insecurity, and the second problem is youth unemployment. 60% of the young people graduating from universities and elsewhere in Kenya are unemployed. So we want to make use of these young people, tap into their capabilities, and allow them to change the future of the continent. And this is just one of the posts by one of the young people recently. This is from Tyson in northern Kenya, showing how desertification is slowly encroaching across the landscape. So what was previously an area of good moisture and good conditions is becoming progressively worse. And so the way in which we're tackling that is tree planting, which is an extremely well understood and well-known approach to reducing the effect of wind and soil erosion through water. So it's a very effective way to stabilize the soil, but also provide alternative ways in which farmers can make money. I'll just skip that, but this is just a post from one of our farmers today on the WhatsApp channel, showing how it's not just the farmers who are super engaged in this, it's also the young people. So this is Sarah and Edda who are participating. So we've given away about 350,000 tree seedlings so far to community members across multiple counties in Kenya. One of the problems we've recently experienced that the trees don't do well because there's no water. So we're now working with the community to find out how we can clean up existing boreholes, put in water catchment areas. This is very, very cheap stuff. So this would cost maybe $3,000 to have one of these. And this would provide water for an entire family and the farm and the neighbors. This is a community one, which is sufficient for about 10 families, has a large surface area. This is a dam, this is a borehole. So these are the practical efforts that we take in increasing the accessibility to water, which of course is critical. Another thing that we do is try to use new technologies or new approaches. So this is biochar, which is well understood to be very effective against drought. And so it's basically just burning wood or any biomass, the absence of oxygen, called pyrolysis. And then when you put it into the soil, it increases the soil health, stabilizes it, increases the nutrients in the soil, but really importantly, provides all of these spaces for the water to collect. So when it does rain, it doesn't just flow away, it's available to the plants. We do a lot of demonstration plots. So we promote, for example, no-till, the use of mulch, and we do this with large communities, again, predominantly women communities, where we show them technologies and we set up these demonstration plots. And so they're living laboratories. And this is not rocket science. This is something that we did here in the United States in the 1870s and 1930s. It's very, very common. We're just trying to do it at scale across Africa. In addition, to using the technology for diagnosing pest problems, we've started to work very closely with IFPRI, one of the CGIAR centers, to see how we could use real-time AI-driven diagnostics to change nutrition for teenagers. So the flip side of food insecurity is issues around poor diets, unhealthy eating, obesity, anorexia. And so we want to use the technology to push urban dwellers in Ghana and Vietnam into eating healthy diets. And so we work very closely with food preparation systems in both Ghana and Vietnam. And then we measure the food and we put it in databases. And then we train the artificial intelligence to diagnose the food and the portion sizes. And this is the output of this. So we can see the different diets here, and the AI is able to correctly determine which food is which based upon just a photograph. And because it has this little pop socket, it's also able to diagnose the volume of it because it has a reference from which it can measure the size. And this is really, really effective. It's within 5 or 10% of a human expert who would then go in and look at the food and weigh it. So this is really a bit of a game changer in its ability to open up AI to help individuals who are able to diagnose or help them understand how much nutrients they're eating, what represents a healthy diet, and also how we can nudge them. And we're finding already in our initial trials that this is nudging healthy behavior in adolescent girls in Ghana and Vietnam, which is very rewarding. So that's the end of the presentation. as we mentioned at the start, it takes a village. So there's an enormous amount of people involved in this. And here I've listed some of them, but even not all of them, because a lot of them just the size of the teams we have. And then the funders, individuals who have given money. And so maybe then if we would be so bold to say, maybe we would acknowledge you. We're currently doing a fundraising drive, and we have if you do donate money, it's matched by a donor who will match it 1-to-1 up to $2 million. So I'll stop there, and hopefully I can have some good questions and we can continue our conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you really so much. Really important work, and really proud of your work saving lives, globally. I will read a couple questions we did have submitted through chat. And the first is any of this technology being used for the spotted lanternfly in Pennsylvania and other parts of the US? And is regenerative and indigenous farming being used in some of these locations?
So we initially engaged a little bit on the spotted lanternfly, but then we sort of stopped. We could have used it earlier on, but I think that in the PA Department of Agriculture moved in a different direction, and then there was a lot of work that was being done in our Department of Entomology. So I think they're tackling that problem very effectively, I hope, themselves. In terms of regenerative agriculture or indigenous, of course, we work with indigenous communities in northern Kenya, across all of Kenya, and we listen to them. So in order for us to do anything, we need to have the buy-in from the elders of the community, the tribe leaders, the chiefs, and we work with the knowledge they have in terms of adaptation to droughts. This is not their first rodeo. There's a lot of things that they do know, so we tap into that. And in addition, we supplement that with what we do know from the science. So we take those two things hand in hand. And part of that is regenerative agriculture. So we absolutely want to push back against this idea that Africa should go the way of the Midwest of the US, where we have large monoculture system. We don't want that. We want integrated systems, regenerative agriculture, polyculture, diversity of approaches. And that's what leads to resilience. You wouldn't put all your retirement savings in one company. You want to diversify. It just makes a lot of sense.
Okay, we had a couple more come in on the chat, and one is, how much money do these farmers make, and are there grants for the women farmers?
What was the second part of that, Robert?
Are there grants for women farmers?
So they make an incredibly small amount of money. So they typically have 1 acre or sometimes half an acre. The land is owned by the farmers. This year, a lot of farmers didn't make any money. They lost money because they grew maize and they had non-regenerative agricultural practices. So that it's a third year in a row there's a drought, and the next year is also expected to be a drought. So, or third season. So losing money in a good year, they might make $150, $200 in profit from that field. So incredibly small amounts. So they're kept at poverty levels. So one of the things that we're trying to do is see how could we work with farms to grow carbon. Because carbon is something that can be traded on the international market. So that's what the trees are for a source of fruit, but also for carbon credits. And so we could work with farmers in order to increase that. I think that's important. Are there grants available? No. These women farmers are completely left out of the loop. I mean, they're ignored. They've been ignored for 40 or 50 years. They remain ignored. So PlantVillage is working very actively in order to provide locally driven solutions that are sustainable, but fundamentally, how do we get these women farmers to make a profit? And that's the fundamentally important part. Extension as an idea began in Dublin in 1846 in response to the Irish potato famine. And the element of that was, how do you get farmers to make a profit? It has to be profit focused. We need to get these women to have more funds so they can send their girls and boys to school, and they can break out of this cycle of poverty.
Okay, we have a couple related to the locust. It said, can you expand on the strategies for combating the locust? Is it spraying? And did you say that increased moisture or drought increases the swarms? And then what happens to all the dead locusts? Hard to imagine where they're disposed.
Yeah, so they are being sprayed extensively with chemicals. That's you have to think of a locust crisis like a fire in a town. You need to get in there and put it out quickly. There are other approaches which use a fungicide, fungus, which is much harder to deploy for a variety of reasons we can go into. But fundamentally, it's about spraying from airplanes that can control them, and it worked very effectively. What happens? They just decompose in the soil, and other creatures eat them. That's what happens when they die. There are some operations trying to harvest them for food, and that some communities eat them, and it will be a viable source. But during the peak of the crisis, the most important thing was killing them as quickly as possible. On the issues of drought, and so it wasn't drought that drove them to higher numbers. It was the cyclones that brought in a lot of water, and that would dump it in places of South Sudan, Ethiopia, Somalia, and so on. And that would lead to a rapid greening up of the desert. And when the desert greened up, it gave more food for the increase in the population of the desert locust.
And another one, you mentioned working with the United Nations, and do you get assistance from the countries that you're working in? Do they provide, or do you run into any obstacles trying to do work in these countries?
Obstacles are always there, but one of the great things that I think is important to emphasize is the trust of the UN flag, and that's why we work in partnership with the United Nations, so that we can deploy these technologies effectively across what is now over 70 countries. And yes, there's always difficulties and hurdles, but I think that going hand in hand with the UN flag is so important. So we're a technology partner at Penn State, and we develop these tools. We get money from the UN to do so, and then it helps to understand with partners in the country when the UN goes with us. That's really, really important.
Okay. See no more in chat. Anyone else have a question they'd like to ask? We have a couple more minutes. Trang, do you see anybody? Nope.
Diane, Diane
we have somebody who raised hand. Diane, do you want to unmute and ask a question?
You're muted, Diane. Diane, if you can hear me, you're muted.
All right. It took me a while to find the hand. That was a lot already. So, okay. As far as the spraying with good sprays, I'm looking back at my notes. So then you're talking about also creating a food supply, looking to create a food supply. And I'm looking back. Some efforts to harvest them for food. So what is there a concern about the sprays, or are they similar to other pesticides that are used on everything?
Yeah, there's no concern. There's an international group who validate these sprays. The sprays are not the problem. The problem is a swarm that can eat as much food as the state of New York and California in one day, and they have to be controlled. Yeah, so the sprays are governed, and they're fine, and they dissipate in the environment. The bigger problem is the increase in the locust numbers.
Well, sure. I just wondered if you were talking about possibly harvesting them for food, it sounded like. Obviously, they will be killed with the spray, killed off. But then it sounds like it wouldn't be an issue then to eat the insect.
Oh, yes. So the recommendation is that individuals don't eat the insects if they have been sprayed. That is absolutely the recommendation.
Oh, that was my question.
Yeah. So if they have not been sprayed and we could determine that, then you can harvest them, as people have done for thousands of years.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, we did have a more of a comment. It says, I think what is most striking about this issue is that these countries are the least responsible for climate change, and they certainly deserve our intervention.
Yeah, Yeah, yes, Africa has contributed less than 3% to greenhouse gas emissions, but it's going to overwhelmingly pay the cost, because 96% of farmers rely upon rain when they plant their seeds. And so if the rain is not going to come because of climate change, then they are in an incredibly precarious situation. And we're now in an all-time high in terms of migration because of failures. And this is not just Africa. This is the scene in the Northern Triangle in Guatemala, Honduras. So the reason we see so much migration to the southern border is because of climate change affecting the crops. There's a wind pattern changes across Central America, and this is leading to less yield on the land, and then people move off the land. So it's hard for people to move off the land, but when they do, then they're at the mercy and then move to other places. So in this case, it's from Africa to Europe or from Central America to the United States.
And I think it's also true that, you don't have to be in Africa or somewhere else to use this. If I want to go out in my backyard, figure out what's wrong with my crops here, I could go to PlantVillage, correct?
No, we turn it off for United States. The United States is
Okay.
extremely well serviced by the extension universities. They don't need us. Same for European Union, Australia, Canada, etc. No, we're focused on the harder problem. So some people sneak in and ask a question from these places, but we tend to ignore them or redirect them to the excellent land grant services.
Okay. Well, seeing no other questions, I again want to thank you so much for.
I think Frank had a question. He's waving.
Oh, Frank. Okay, thank you, Frank. Did we see
Frank? We can't hear you.
Could you elaborate a little bit more on the notion of carbon-based plants for this region and how that might be fostered?
So we obviously have to get to net zero by 2050, 2060, 2070. And there's no way we're going to do that because through reduction of emissions. We're not driving enough electric vehicles. We're not reducing our flights. We're not reducing our consumption. So the only way we can get to net zero is to massively upscale carbon capture. And there's two ways to do that. You can do it through a machine, which is not yet developed, so the technology is poor, or you can do it the way nature has evolved, which is through plants. And so we can massively upscale carbon capture via tree planting or carbon capture in the soil. And so what we would like to do is to see that we could increase tree planting around farms, and then we could capture carbon in the soil, and then we could also sequester that for over 1,000 years. We could sequester that for over 1,000 years by forming biochar. So this is something that we can do effectively, and the technology is proven. And so we would like to see each African farm turning into a carbon factory, capturing about 5 or 6 tons. And you multiply that by 200 million farms, then you could pull down 1 billion tons, a gigaton of carbon a year. We think it's an absolute possibility, and we're trying to push in that direction. And then farmers could get rich doing it. So we could sell that ton of carbon to the European Union or elsewhere for as much as $225 a ton. So it could be the largest wealth transfer in history between the European Union, the rich countries, and Africa to pay for them harvesting carbon for us and storing it for over 1,000 years.
Thank you.
Okay.
I have a question,
see.
Bob.
Go ahead, Norma.
I'm interested in, Dr. Hughes, you're talking about your fundraising.
Yeah.
And one of the things Bob is going to talk about is our Make a Difference project, in which we raise funds and we try to target it for something specific because that draws the most attention. And we had been thinking about raising funds to purchase phones. But I'm wondering, is that of value to you versus the general fundraising that you're doing right now?
No, it's extremely valuable. So one phone is then shared among about 60 women, predominantly women. And so it's in the community. And we know that having a phone increases the profitability of your farm between 160 and 530%. And so it's just dramatic. So we well established that. So the more phones, the better. So that's definitely an important component of the fundraising. We've already distributed over 600 phones, and then we would be very happy and glad to work with you all to distribute more. But it's the phone is a portal to the world for them. It's a way to get knowledge, and they fundamentally lack expertise, and this is just transformative. So we'd be delighted to work with you on getting more phones into the hands of more women farmers.
Thanks.
I do have some other examples, Norma. We're getting to the Make a Difference project, so I do have some other examples from PlantVillage, and also Barbara asked about how to get involved, so that'll come up in a second. But we do have a hand raised by Ms. Foreman, and so unmute yourself and go ahead.
Thanks, Bob. I just wondered, how receptive are the farmers to use these resources? Are they very open and excited about them, or is there some resistance? And if there is, how do you kind of overcome that and just help them to understand that you're here for them to help them?
So that's why I put a trust in such a large letters. It's all about trust, and this is where the dream team are so critically important, because they do overlap in age with the daughters and sons of the farmers. And a lot of farmers have been jaded by yet another project coming in and yet another NGO, so to speak, where oftentimes they're used as props for images to get more funding for the NGO. And so we're fundamentally different from that. And so we're partners with them, and we're working, 5 days a week with tens of thousands of farmers across the region. And so they understand that. They understand that when the dream team member is living in the same community as them and is always available, and oftentimes the most important thing that we say is we don't know what the answer is. And many of us don't, because climate change is throwing such a curveball for us. And the farmers appreciate that. They appreciate that they're going to work with us to find solutions. And again, we're not reinventing anything here. That's what Extension did here in the 1910s and 20s and throughout. So it's great now that there's such strong advocates of us. And what we also love is that farmers always hear about us before we get to a new area, because their neighbors have told them. So in one survey, we found that maybe 11% of farmers had received a text message from us, but over 90% had heard about us. And that's through word of mouth. And that's because we are trusted and partners with them. So we're very encouraged by that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Okay, I see Diane has her hand back up, so turn back to you again.
One thing that came to mind when we were talking about shrinking of the food sources, I heard that our own food source is shrinking in the South, and over time we'll be needing to move further and further north. I mean, that was confusing to me, because I think, okay, we're now in Canada to grow stuff, on the border of Canada, and it seems like the conditions are not so great up there. I just wondered if I might be able to speak to that issue of our own shrinking food source here.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. Climate change is going to shift what's happening. So we're going to see a lot of the grains move north. So the wheat and the corn. We'll see that in both continental USA and Canada, as well as in Europe, where we see a lot of production going into Russia. And so some places will benefit. This year, we saw a devastation of the maize or also lawns in the United States due to fall armyworm, because the spring came really, really early and the fall came very, very late. And so you have these long periods of temperature. So the pests are becoming a problem. But even though it might move up into Canada, the problem, what Canada saw this year is that it was a devastating drought. So everything is changing, and anybody that tells you they know what the future is under a climate change world is not true. Everything is new for us. That's where I think this Lincoln quote is so important. So the United States will have to adapt. And this is, we were at a White House event last week with Secretary Vilsack and Administrator Power talking about this very thing. That everybody understands it. The summer of 2021, has been a wake-up call for all of us. And that's really driven home the point.
Okay. Frank, do you have another question?
No.
No.
Thank you.
Okay. So again, thank you so much, David. It was really important work, and people are asking how to support that. And so that'll lead us to our Make a Difference project this year is to help support PlantVillage. And I'll read something about it. It's a lifeline for farmers in Africa struggling to cope with climate change and pests. As you've heard in the talk, it helps smallholders cope with pests and climate change. Artificial intelligence farming families helps them to bring local advice to the farmers. They reach over 9 million farmers a week, and the gift you will give will allow for considerable scaling of that. So there's the Hopper Dean family, and they've agreed to match donations to PlantVillage up to $2.5 million, which is pretty amazing, to drive forward its work helping tens of millions of farmers across Africa. So any donations you make will be doubled by this donation. It's a family. Jeff Dean is one of the leading AI researchers at Google, and he's been a strong advocate of PlantVillage deployment of AI solutions in East Africa, where we lived as a kid, both in Uganda and Somalia. And to quote him, the potential of giving farmers all across Africa access to better information about local growing conditions, assessment of crop diseases, and other technical tools is why we're so excited and happy to support the work of PlantVillage. So as I said, a few examples through your donation, continued support of farming communities, coping with the climate change. A $150 phone can be shared by 50 to 100 farmers in the community, all of them getting access to the AI and knowledge databases. $2,000 allows them to send a weather alert message to 500,000 farmers, and $80 allows them to buy tree seedlings and cover crop seeds for a farm, which helps keeps moisture in the soil, as we saw. And then, as David also addressed, a $2,000 donation will allow to provide a rain harvesting system so families can capture and store rainwater. So you see, Trong has put up the link. You can just go to our webpage, and we have a donate button on there, and we will continue with this fundraiser until the end of the year, as people are frequently looking for an alternative holiday gift at the end of the year. So we will run it through December and put more notices out. But this is right on our webpage, and we'll put the exact link up in a couple of minutes. But again, I urge you to please help support it. And thank you so much for joining us today. So as I said earlier, keeping with our Irish theme, we're glad that Callanish has provided us with 2 songs from their performances at the Arts Festival last summer. Thanks to the folks at the Arts Fest for letting us share their wonderful music. The members of this group are Holly Foy, Patty Lambert, Betsy Gamble, and Louisa Smith. So I think we're ready to go with Callanish.
Well, I think we'll wind things up with a set of reels, yeah? Just to completely change the mood. The reels we're going to do next are Tam Lin and Dick Gossip. And Betsy, would you like to talk about Tam Lin?
Sure. Tam Lin was a character in folklore who was captured by the fairies, and his lover wanted to know how to get him back. So
his lover or his mother?
His lover. His lover. I suppose that would work that way too. So she went to the wise woman and asked how to get him back, and the wise woman told her to sit by the side of the road, hide by the side of the road, and when the fairies rode by on their way home, she should leap out and grab him off the horse and hold on to him no matter what happened. So she hid by the side of the road, and she leaped out and grabbed him, and he turned magically into a bear. And there, you'll hear the bear in the song. And she hung on to him. And then he turned into an eagle, and she hung on to him and kept turning into different animals, and she kept holding on. And this is a fairy tale with a happy ending, so she held on to him until he turned back into himself, and they lived happily ever after. And we'll play a happy tune to Gossip.
Want one more song? Yay, good.
You have to help out though.
Yes, you'll have to help out on this one. It's a clap along. Hold on.
This is our last one, so thank you all for being here. It's been a joy. Thank you so much.
So this song has been popular in the Americas since at least the Revolution, and we liked it for the same reason the Irish liked it. It is anti-British and anti-colonialism. And this one is called Whiskey in the Jar. It's been covered by everybody, including Metallica, for some reason. It's actually pretty good, so check that out. And we are so happy to leave you with it tonight. And there's a little bit on the chorus where you can clap along, and you'll catch on pretty quickly. It's easy. As I was going over the far Kerry mountains, I met with Captain Farrell and his money he was counting. I first produced my pistol and then produced my rapier. Said stand and deliver, for I am a bold deceiver. Mushering da-ma-da, work for the daddy-o, work for the daddy-o. There's whiskey in the jar. I counted out his money and it made a pretty penny. I put it in me pocket and I took it home to Jenny. She said and she swore that she never would deceive me. But the devil take the women, for they always lie so easy. Mushering da-ma-da, work for the daddy-o, work for the daddy-o. There's whiskey in the jar. I went up to me chambers, all for to take a slumber. I dreamt of gold and jewels, and for sure it was no wonder. But Jenny took me charges, and she filled them up with water. And she sent for Captain Farrell to be ready for the slaughter. Mushering da-ma-da, work for the daddy-o, work for the daddy-o. There's whiskey in the jar. 'Twas early in the morning, afore I rose for travel. Up came a band of footmen, and likewise Captain Farrell. I first produced my pistol, for she stole away me rapier. But I couldn't shoot the water, so a prisoner I was taken. Mushering da-ma-da, work for the daddy-o, work for the daddy-o. There's whiskey in the jar. If anyone can aid me, it's me brother in the army. If I can find his station down in Cork or in Killarney, and if he'll come and save me, we'll go roaming in Kilkenny. And I swear he'll treat me better than me darling Spartan Jenny. Mushering da-ma-da, work for the daddy-o, work for the daddy-o. There's whiskey in the jar. Mushering da-ma-da, work for the daddy-o, work for the daddy-o. There's whiskey in the jar.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
It was great.
Okay, thank you, Callanish. Again, they're a local band and they perform around the area. So if you get a chance to go out and see them live, they're really good. I just want to introduce, you see on your screen right now, the members of our board. And so we're all listed there. One name, there's a young man named Matt Adams, who's down in Altoona, and he's been helping us a lot, keeping our Facebook page and web page up to date. Not an official member of our board, but he is a member of our association. I want to thank him as well. And I do want to invite anyone to please become a member of the UNA and even consider getting involved with our board. The fee is just $25 for new members, seniors, fixed income folks, and it's absolutely free to anyone under 25. And they're referred to as the Genuiners. You receive lots of free information from the United Nations. You get calls for advocacy. You have the opportunity to actually attend Global Summit in the United Nations early each year, of course, except the last 2 years when COVID kind of canceled that. So you can join on our website there. There's also a way for you to just get on our mailing list and let you know what we'd like to hear from you, what issues are important, so we can taper our programs in the next year. Hopefully we'll be back live in public, but we'll see what happens come spring with COVID and all. I always say there's such incredible work that goes on at Penn State that many people don't even know about. And so I think we should be, really proud of what's going on at Penn State. And this initiative is just tremendous. And I hope, you'll share this. We'll have it up again on our Facebook and our webpage, and hopefully more people will be able to, tune in and take part. So, and we did have a question asked if you can tailor your donation specifically for something like buying $150 cell phone. And I did get hold of David, and he did say, yes, you can certainly do that. So if you care to make a specific donation for a specific thing, he'll be glad to take your money to help no matter what. So I know that Trang also wanted to see if she could get a snapshot of everybody who's participating. And so if she can do that, if you don't want to, you can take yourself off video. And are you smile? Should we smile now for the picture, Trang?
Yeah, I'm waiting for people to turn on their camera. Wow, that's great.
Some of them might not want to.
Okay, so
maybe I should turn off mine.
You can Photoshop it later.
We have almost everybody. Okay, so I just take a pictures right now. Say cheese.
Okay.
Cheese. Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
round
All
of
right, thank you,
applause for
everybody.
Dr. Hughes.
Yay!
Really great information. So I'll let you get back to your Sundays, everybody, and happy UN Day. Thank you.